The neutral observer, the stars had been at war for 25 years, and Earth had watched every moment of it. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the massive holographic display in the Deep Space Monitoring Station, watching red markers blink across the galaxy as another Vectari fleet engaged the Threnody Alliance near the Centauri Nebula. She sipped her coffee and made notes on her tablet. Just another day of cataloging distant destruction. Status report, Director Chen, came a voice from behind her. Admiral Morrison, Earth's military liaison to the Galactic Confederation, approached, with his usual stern expression. At 62, Morrison had spent his entire career preparing for wars that never came to Earth's doorstep. The Vectari pushed past the Threnody defensive line at Sector 7. Sarah replied, highlighting the battlefield on her display. 3 billion casualties in the last month alone. The Confederation estimates the war will continue for at least another decade. Morrison nodded grimly, and our status remains unchanged. Observer only. No military involvement, no taking sides, no interference. Sarah had recited these words so many times they felt hollow. The Confederation Council still believes humans aren't ready for interstellar conflict. They prefer us to keep documenting and stay out of the way. That arrangement had served Earth well for a quarter century. While ancient civilizations tore each other apart across the galaxy, humanity had prospered. Earth's population had grown to 12 billion. Human colonies had spread to 47 systems. Science had advanced by leaps and bounds, fueled by technologies shared by grateful alien species who appreciated Earth's neutrality. Sarah's personal communication device chimed with an incoming message. She glanced at the sender and smiled. Maya, her daughter, was calling from the research station on Kepler-4 for to be humanity's most distant scientific outpost. At 28, Maya had inherited her mother's passion for xenobiology and her father's stubborn determination to push boundaries. "Mom, you need to see this." Maya's excited voice filled the communication chamber. Her image appeared on the screen, showing the cramped laboratory where she worked alongside researchers from 6 different species. "We've made a breakthrough. With the Threnody biological samples, their cellular regeneration process could revolutionize human medicine." Sarah felt the familiar mix of pride and worry that came with having a daughter working on the galaxy's frontier. Kepler 442b was technically in neutral space, but it sat uncomfortably close to active war zones. "Are you maintaining proper security?" "Protocols, of course, Mum. We're scientists, not soldiers. Both sides respect our neutrality." Maya's confidence was infectious. Besides, what would anyone want with a bunch of researchers studying plant samples and bacteria cultures? That conversation had been 3 days ago. Now Sarah stared at the emergency transmission that had just arrived through the quantum relay network. The message was brief, clinical, and devastating. Kepler-4 for to be research station destroyed. No survivors detected. Cause unknown. Investigation pending. Sarah's hands trembled as she played the message again. 15,000 people lived on that station. Scientists, engineers, their families, children who had never known any world but the sterile corridors of humanity's most advanced research facility. Maya had been among them. Director Chen, Morrison's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" She couldn't speak. The holographic display showed the last known position of Kepler-4 for to be as a blinking yellow marker. Now it was gone. Just empty space where her daughter's life had been. Within hours, the official report arrived from the Galactic Confederation. The destruction of Kepler-4 to be had been caused by collateral damage during a Vectari military operation. The Empire had been targeting a nearby Threnody supply depot and had miscalculated their weapons blast radius. The research station, despite its protected neutral status, had been completely vaporized. Earth's President Williams delivered a formal statement, expressing deep regret for the loss of life and calling for a thorough investigation. The Vectari Empire issued a standard apology, claiming the attack had been an unfortunate accident and offering to pay reparations to the families of the deceased. Sarah watched the political theater with growing rage. Reparations, as if money could bring back 15,000 lives, as if credits could resurrect her daughter. The Galactic Confederation accepted the Vectari explanation without question. After all, accidents happened in war. Neutral parties sometimes got caught in the crossfire. These things were regrettable but unavoidable. But Sarah had access to data that politicians and diplomats never saw. The Deep Space Monitoring Station tracked every ship movement, every energy signature, every communication burst in 1,000 light-year radius. She had watched the Vectari fleet approach Kepler-4 for 2b. She had seen them adjust their targeting solutions. She had recorded their communications. The attack had been deliberate. Sarah worked through the night, piecing together the evidence. The Vectari had specifically targeted the research station, not the supply depot. Their weapons had been calibrated for maximum destruction against the station's unique shielding. Most damning of all, their communications had included references to the human problem and testing new protocols. She tried to take her findings to Admiral Morrison, but he was already under orders from Earth's government to accept the official story. "We can't afford to antagonize the Vectari Empire," he explained. "They control 30% of the galaxy's trade routes. Earth's economy depends on maintaining neutrality." Sarah tried the Confederation Council, but they dismissed her evidence as incomplete and speculative. The Vectari had too much political influence, and humans were just observers. Why would anyone listen to the complaints of a species that had never fired a shot in anger? That night, Sarah sat in her apartment overlooking the Pacific Ocean, staring at a photograph of Maya. Her daughter had been so proud to be part of humanity's first generation of interstellar explorers. She had believed in the peaceful mission of science, in the power of knowledge to unite different species. She had died because someone had decided that human lives were expendable. The communication device chimed again. This time the caller was Commander James Torres, Maya's former boyfriend and the head of security for the outer colonies. His face was grim when he appeared on screen. "Sarah, I've been investigating the Kepler attack. You're not going to like what I found." Torres had connections throughout the colonial defense network, relationships built during humanity's expansion into space. His investigation had uncovered shipping records, communication intercepts, and financial transactions that painted a horrifying picture. The Vectari hadn't just attacked Kepler-4 for 2b. They had been conducting a systematic campaign against human outposts for months, always making it look like accidents or collateral damage. But the pattern was unmistakable. They were testing human responses, measuring Earth's commitment to neutrality, and evaluating humanity's military capabilities. "They're using us as test subjects," Torres explained. "Every attack is designed to push us a little further, to see how much we'll take before we break. They want to know if humans will fight back or if we'll keep hiding behind our observer status." Sarah felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. "They're preparing for something bigger. I think they're planning to eliminate humanity as a potential threat while we're still weak and divided. The Threnody Alliance might be winning the war, and the Vectari need to secure their flanks. They can't afford to have humans develop into a military power. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Torres quietly reached out to others who had lost loved ones in the accidents. They found ship captains whose crews had been killed in suspicious pirate attacks. They discovered colony administrators whose settlements had been destroyed by natural disasters that showed signs of artificial acceleration. They connected with military officers who had watched helplessly as their people died while Earth's government ordered them to stand down. These weren't random tragedies. They were a deliberate campaign of extermination disguised as collateral damage. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She used her position as director of the Deep Space Monitoring Station to begin copying classified files, technical specifications, and intelligence reports. She identified every human with military experience who might be willing to act outside official channels. She began stockpiling weapons and supplies at remote locations throughout human space. Asterisk. She was no longer just observing the galaxy's wars. She was preparing to fight one. The final piece fell into place when Dr. Elena Vasquez, Maya's research partner, sent an encrypted message from a Threnody refugee ship. Elena had been off station when Kepler 442b was destroyed, and she had spent weeks gathering evidence of her own. Sarah Maya was working on something important before the attack. She had discovered that the Vectari were collecting human genetic samples from various colonies, not just taking them, but specifically requesting them through intermediaries. She thought they were trying to develop biological weapons targeted at human physiology. The evidence was overwhelming. The Vectari Empire had been conducting a secret war against humanity for years, using their political position to mask genocide as accidents. Earth's government either didn't know or didn't care, too focused on maintaining profitable neutrality to recognize the threat. Sarah gathered her allies in an abandoned mining facility in the asteroid belt. There were 37 of them at first, men and women from across human space who had lost everything to Vectari accidents. They weren't soldiers in any official sense, but they had skills, resources, and most importantly, they had nothing left to lose. "We call ourselves the Silent Watchers," Sarah announced to the group. "For 25 years, we've watched the galaxy burn while Earth stayed safe. Now they've brought the fire to our doorstep, and our government refuses to act, so we will." Their first target would be a Vectari research facility in the Kepler 438 system, where intelligence suggested human prisoners were being held for experimentation. It wasn't a military installation, so it wouldn't be heavily defended, but it would send a message that humanity was no longer content to be a passive observer. Sarah looked around at the faces of her companions, seeing her own grief and determination reflected in their eyes. They were about to start a war that Earth's government would disavow against an enemy that controlled half the galaxy. They had no official support, no massive fleets, no ancient weapons, but they had something the Vectari had never encountered before. Humans who had finally decided to fight back. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you made humanity personal. Asterisk, the human response. The Silent Watchers struck at dawn, ship time. Sarah stood on the bridge of the stolen Confederation transport vessel that Torres had liberated from a decommissioned depot, watching the Vectari research facility grow larger on the main screen. The station looked innocent enough, a cluster of white modules connected by transport tubes, orbiting the dead planet Kepler 438c. No military markings, no visible weapons, just the standard configuration of a scientific outpost. But Sarah knew better. Intelligence gathered from Elena's contacts in the Threnody Alliance had revealed the station's true purpose. It wasn't conducting research on alien biology or xenochemistry. It was a laboratory designed specifically for experimenting on human subjects. 15 minutes to intercept, Torres announced from the tactical station. He had traded his colonial security uniform for salvaged combat armor, but his voice carried the same calm authority that had made him one of humanity's most effective peacekeepers. No response to our identification signals. That wasn't surprising. The Silent Watchers were using a falsified Confederation transponder that identified them as a routine supply convoy. To the Vectari, they were just another boring administrative necessity. Beneath the attention of the Empire's brilliant military minds, Sarah activated the ship's internal communication system. All teams, this is Director Chen. You know why we're here? The Vectari Empire has been conducting illegal experiments on human prisoners for months. Our governments won't act, so we will. Remember, we're not here for revenge. We're here for evidence and rescue. The lie came easily. Sarah absolutely was here for revenge, and she suspected most of her team felt the same way. But they needed to believe they were better than their enemies, that humanity still stood for something noble even when forced to violence. The assault began with surgical precision. Dr. Marcus Webb, a former military engineer who had lost his son in a mining accident, used his technical expertise to disable the station's communication array. The Vectari couldn't call for help, couldn't warn their superiors, couldn't even send a distress signal. Lieutenant Sarah Park, a discharged naval officer whose court-martial had been overturned too late to save her career, led the boarding party. Through the station's docking bay, the Vectari guards had been expecting a supply delivery, not a military assault. They died without firing a shot. Sarah followed the boarding party through the station's corridors, her pulse rifle feeling strange. In her hands, she had trained with weapons during her mandatory service, but she had never expected to use them against living beings. The necessity felt cold and distant, like a scientific calculation rather than a moral choice. The first laboratory they breached contained equipment that made Sarah's stomach turn. Surgical tables designed for human anatomy, but modified with restraints that would prevent any movement. Specimen containers filled with human tissue samples, carefully labeled with dates and genetic markers. Computer terminals displaying research. Data that reduced human beings to test subjects and statistical measurements. Jesus Christ, whispered Dr. Amanda Foster, the team's medical officer. She had volunteered for the mission after her research partner had died in a supposedly random attack. They're not just experimenting on humans. They're trying to weaponize our biology. The data was worse than Sarah had imagined. The Vectari weren't just developing biological weapons targeted at human physiology. They were creating viruses that would spread through human populations while leaving other species untouched. They were engineering toxins that would be absorbed through human skin but remain harmless to Vectari biology. They were building the tools for genocide. Director Chen, you need to see this, Torres called from across the laboratory. He was standing beside a sealed containment unit, his face pale behind his helmet's faceplate. There are humans in here. They're still alive. Sarah rushed to the containment unit and looked through the transparent barrier. Inside, she could see 3 human figures strapped to medical tables, their bodies covered with monitoring equipment and intravenous lines. They were conscious but sedated, their eyes tracking movement with the slow, drugged awareness of test subjects. How long have they been here? Sarah asked. Torres checked the monitoring displays. According to these readings, at least 6 months, maybe longer. They've been kept alive for continuous testing. Sarah felt her carefully controlled rage beginning to crack. These weren't enemy soldiers captured in battle. They were civilians who had been kidnapped from human colonies and transported across the galaxy to be tortured in the name of science. One of them looked barely 18 years old, probably a student or young worker who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Get them out, Sarah ordered. Dr. Foster, prepare the medical bay. We're taking them home. As the rescue team worked to free the prisoners, Sarah continued exploring the station. Each new laboratory revealed fresh horrors. Vectari scientists had been dissecting human brains to understand how human decision-making differed from their own. They had been testing the effects of various toxins on human nervous systems. They had been studying human reproductive biology to find ways to sterilize entire populations. The worst discovery came in the station's central database. The Vectari hadn't just been experimenting on individual humans. They had been conducting systematic studies of human colonies, identifying genetic variations between different populations and developing targeted biological weapons that would affect specific ethnic groups while leaving others untouched. Sarah downloaded every file, every research report, every communication log. This wasn't just evidence of war crimes. It was proof of a planned genocide that would make the destruction of Kepler 442 be looked like a minor accident. Director, we have a problem. Torres's voice crackled through the communication system. Long-range sensors are detecting 3 military vessels approaching our position. They'll be here in 2 hours. Sarah made a decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of fleeing with the evidence, she ordered her team to prepare the station for broadcast. Using the facility's own communication array, she began transmitting the research data across every frequency, every network, every communication channel in the galaxy. The evidence went out in multiple languages, formatted for different species. Sensory systems, transmitted through diplomatic channels and black market networks alike. Within minutes, beings across the galaxy were seeing footage of human test subjects, reading reports of planned genocide, and learning the truth about the Vectari Empire's accidents. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The Threnody Alliance, which had been fighting the Vectari for decades, suddenly understood that their enemy was capable of developing species-specific weapons. Neutral governments that had maintained trade relationships with the Empire began questioning their asterisk. But the most important reaction came from humanity itself. Across 47 star systems, humans watched the broadcasts with growing horror and rage. The evidence was undeniable. Earth's government could no longer dismiss the attacks as accidents or call for calm diplomacy. The Vectari Empire had declared war on humanity, and now every human in the galaxy knew it. Sarah received the first response while the silent watchers were still evacuating the research station. Admiral Morrison's face appeared on the communication screen, his usual stern expression replaced by something she had never seen before. Fury. Director Chen, what have you done? He demanded. But before Sarah could answer, he continued, never mind. I know what you've done. You forced Earth's hand. The President has called an emergency session of the Confederation Council. We're withdrawing from observer status and declaring the Vectari Empire a hostile power. That was just the beginning. Within hours, Sarah was receiving messages from human colonies across the galaxy. Colonial governors were calling up their defense forces. Mining operations were converting their industrial equipment into weapons. Research stations were sharing technical data that had been classified for decades. Humanity was mobilizing for war. Dr. Elena Buscus-Meyer's former research partner sent a message from the Threnody Alliance's capital world. Sarah, the Alliance Council wants to meet with human representatives. They're offering a full military alliance. They want to share weapons, technology, and coordinate attacks against Vectari targets. The galaxy was choosing sides, and humanity was no longer the neutral observer sitting on the sidelines. The Silent Watchers had accomplished more than just rescuing 3 prisoners and exposing war crimes. They had awakened a sleeping giant. Sarah stood in the command center of the captured research station, watching as her team prepared to destroy the facility rather than let it fall back into Vectari hands. In a few hours, they would be fighting a running battle against superior numbers and advanced technology. Most of them would probably die, but they had already won the war that mattered. The Vectari Empire had spent years carefully orchestrating humanity's destruction, planning to eliminate the species before it could become a threat. They had counted on Earth's government remaining passive, on humans accepting their fate as collateral damage in someone else's war. They had underestimated what would happen when humans finally decided to fight back. Director Chen Torres called. From the tactical station, we're getting reports from human colonies across the galaxy. The Vectari are launching attacks on civilian targets, probably trying to destroy evidence of their research programs. Sarah nodded. The Empire was moving to Phase 2 of their plan, abandoning subtlety for direct military action. But it was too late. The evidence was already spreading across the galaxy, and humanity was already responding. Signal all human vessels. Sarah ordered. Tell them the Silent Watchers have completed their mission. The galaxy knows the truth about the Vectari Empire. Now it's time for humanity to remind them why observer status was never about weakness. The communication went out across the stars, reaching human ships, stations, and colonies throughout the galaxy. Sarah's words were simple but clear. We have watched in silence for 25 years. Now we fight. The Vectari Empire had made a fatal mistake. They had believed that humanity's neutrality came from cowardice rather than choice. They had assumed that a species without a military tradition would be easy to eliminate. They had never considered what would happen when a race of problem solvers, innovators, and survivors decided that the galaxy's status quo was no longer acceptable. Earth had stayed out of the galactic war for a quarter century, content to observe and document while ancient civilizations destroyed each other. But the Vectari had made it personal. They had attacked humanity's children, conducted genocide in the name of science, and dismissed human lives as expendable. Now they would learn what humans were truly capable of when they stopped watching and started fighting. The galaxy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who has been quietly studying your weaknesses for 25 years. Sarah looked out at the stars, knowing that Maya would never see them again, but believing that her daughter's sacrifice had not been in vain. The Silent Watchers had spoken, and the galaxy had heard. Humanity was no longer watching from afar. The war had come home, and Earth was ready to fight back. Asterisk.